This episode of Counterpressed is presented by Subway. It's that time of year again, football fans. Grab your tickets to the Subway League Cup final on March 15th at Ashton Gate Stadium. Head over to ashtongatestadium.co.uk. Manchester United and Chelsea will go head-to-head in what is sure to be a cracking final. Can't make the game? Make sure you watch the highlights on the Barclays WSL YouTube channel. And of course, get your Subway fix beforehand. Download the Subway app now for fresh new deals every week. Eat fresh, feel good, freshly prepared per order. Hello and welcome to Counterpressed on The Ringer and Spotify. I'm in the studio with Jessy Humphreys and Tim Stillman. On today's show, it was easy in the end for Arsenal and Manchester United. They are both through to the quarter-final stage of the Champions League. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about Wolfsburg and Real Madrid progressing before getting onto a little mailbag with Tim Stillman. Tim, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Good to have you here. You had to brave a very cold and wet Meadow Park on Wednesday night.
Is there any other type of Meadow Park?
It's true.
Is there any other type of England at the moment? Basically, I think I've been to about 15 or 20 football games in 2026, and I think I got soaked to every single one. So, yeah, par the course now.
Yeah, it has been particularly bad these last few weeks. And like you say, Meadow Park is probably one of the worst places to be in those conditions. So hats off to anyone that was there on Wednesday night. JPH, you have been back post-Winter Olympics, actually.
I have, yes. I was here on
You
Monday.
didn't bring our Flo in today.
No, sorry. I ended up not being at my house to get the Flo.
But
so she will come on Monday.
Great.
Yeah.
So we'll do a big reveal.
But
on
I will
Monday.
say yesterday was maybe the most stressful sporting day of my life. In
Your
terms
life?
Of,
wow.
No, not in terms of like emotional stress. Obviously, like there's been football games I care about more. But in terms of having so much stuff to watch at once, we obviously had Champions League. Nottingham Forest were playing, and my girlfriend's a Forest fan, so obviously that had to be on the big
What was the
TV.
score in the end, by the way?
3-0 to Forest. They're doing the whole, they're going to win the Europa League thing and get relegated, which, love. And then all the Winter Olympics, curling, ice hockey final, half-pipe, skiing qualies, and then the figure skating.
Yeah,
I was
busy.
It was a lot. Your curling commentary was much appreciated.
I'm a real curling head. Tim, I know before we started recording you said you're not really into the Winter Olympics / you're such a football fan that you struggled to sort of get into other sports. Have you tried curling? Can I pitch curling to you?
No. I'm like tangentially aware of its existence, but I don't think I've even ever watched it. So I know what it is. Like it kind of looks like you're sweeping the kitchen floor type thing. But or it looks like, I don't even know what it's called, like the curling disc, is it? Looks like one of those vacuum cleaners that just work
the Roomba.
on their own. Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I find it very peaceful to watch.
I'm not that big a curling fan, I've got to admit. You are like obsessed.
I know, I think I should start watching it outside of the Winter Olympics because I just watch every 4 years and then I put it away in a cupboard.
My thing about the Winter Olympics is if you start watching any of these sports outside of the Winter Olympics, that's time for an intervention. You've gone too far in sport.
No, you're probably right, actually. If you catch anyone watching Ski Sunday on BBC, it's over. The dream is over. I do think it's the novelty of just getting involved every 4
figure
years.
skating. I was saying to Honor last night, I think what feels nice is knowing that the next Winter Olympics is also in Europe has made me feel extra invested.
I thought the next one was in Utah. No, that's the one after.
2 away.
Oh.
So 2030 is in the French Alps.
Oh, ooh.
And I feel like
interesting.
I'd be not less into it, but there'd be something in the back of my head thinking, oh, it's a bit of a shame if like the next one's going to be on this crazy time zone and I'm not going to be able to follow it. But it feels really nice that it's like, well, lots of these athletes will probably be back in 4 years' time and I'll feel like ready to go.
Yeah, when it's back in the US, we're not going to be able to really watch the figure skating because that will be on peak US hours.
No, but I am so figure skating pilled. Maybe that is the thing I'd get into.
You're going to be staying up all night at the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
The Super Bowl of winter sports. Okay. Again, we're always checking in the Winter Olympics. That might be the last one. Actually, we've got Monday, and then it's going to be over.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, well, we've got one. We'll have a guaranteed Great Britain medal by Monday. Mm-hmm. No, don't cross your fingers. Oh, you're crossing your fingers. It's gold.
Yeah, I want gold.
I
want gold in the curling.
And maybe Zoe Cross our fingers for Zoe.
So. Yeah, so we'll see. We'll check in on that on Monday. But let's talk about the Champions League after this. So really straightforward for both Manchester United and Arsenal in the end. Manchester United beat Atletico Madrid 5-0 on aggregate on Thursday night, and Arsenal beating Leuven 7-1 on Wednesday night. Comprehensive performances and results, and they both got through relatively unscathed. For Manchester United, there's probably a little bit more frustration about losing a few players through injury. Tim, we'll start with Arsenal's performance across the two legs, because we haven't really had a chance to chat to you since the first leg. We predicted them to get through with ease. They'd already played Leuven and beat them in the league phase. But were you impressed in the way that they went about it across these two legs?
Certainly in the first leg. I mean, it's really difficult to kind of pass, because Arsenal should be beating Leuven about 7-1 on aggregate. That was about what I expected. And the second leg was a bit of a non-event, because it was already 4-0. The pitch was terrible. Essentially nobody really wanted to be there. I'm not sure the players did either. I think what was interesting about the first leg, though, was playing Olivia Smith up front, because they didn't have to do that. And they'd done it against Man City, but that felt like a very specific Man City kind of thing. But then to go against the team who plays in a low block and decide to play Olivia Smith up front and it really working, that was really interesting. And I think she showed quite a lot of interesting variety in that position that suggests she can do more than just running behind. But Arsenal had a really good game plan for the first leg, and Renee said this afterwards. To Leuven's credit, they did something very different in all three games that Arsenal have played against them, but the gap's just too big, and the Leuven manager acknowledged that after the first leg as well.
Yeah, and they deserve a lot of credit for even getting through to this stage of the competition. It was always going to be a huge ask for them to advance to this stage, so that's massive for them, and hopefully they'll be rewarded. I mean, there is decent prize money as well for every game that you win in the league phase, and for how far you progress, so hopefully that's going to make a difference for them moving forward. Jessy, we didn't get a chance to chat to you after the first Arsenal leg either, as you were away in Milan on Winter Olympics duty, but what Tim touched on there, we talked about with Max as well, and it's been a kind of interesting thing for Arsenal to unlock over the last few games, not just in the Champions League but in WSL, this new Olivia Smith, more traditional number 9 role, and it has worked really well and added kind of a new dimension to that attack.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways I feel like not super surprised that it's worked. I think definitely if you watched her when she was at Sporting, in terms of the way she could kind of lead that attack and get shots off from a variety of places across the pitch. She's got such a powerful shot, and then her ability to be able to drift and bring other players in. I think that feels like something that is a very natural fit with, say, having Russo as your 10 as well, in terms of being able to create the space for her in the box. So I feel like it doesn't necessarily feel like a surprise in terms of that it's a role that could potentially suit her. I really like Smith as a player, and I feel like sometimes we can overcomplicate what we want attacking players to do, and being able to take shots is for me like always one of the number one like shorthand things that you can look at. And if someone gets shots off, I will just always prefer them in my team and in a place where they can get shots off. And I feel like Smith is someone who really encapsulates that in terms of her willingness to both shoot from range and from close to the goal. So yeah, I feel like it'll be interesting to see. You know, obviously it's something that has been related to Blackstenius' injury, but it'll be interesting to see if it's something that is persisted with, because I guess we've seen, you know, under Sleggers that there is a sense that, you know, there is a want for Russo to be able to play as a 9 and as a 10, or, you know, even in the way of like every game at like 70 minutes Russo moves back and Blackstenius comes on. It'll be interesting to see whether, you know, if Smith was to develop in that role, whether that was something that would become a bit more fixed.
Yeah, what it kind of says to me as well, it doesn't say to me Olivia Smith must be the centre forward. It says to me Arsenal need to, wherever she plays, Arsenal need to get Olivia Smith in front of goal as much as possible. Maybe I'm thinking, could she be more like a 2022 Beth Mead, where she's still playing out wide, but really it's about getting her in front of goal, because Russo will score, but not to that kind of Bunny Shaw level. Yeah, that's what it says to me. It's not like, oh, she must be the centre forward now. It's like when she plays, you know, she's got to come in and get in the penalty area as much as possible.
Yeah, is the positional element, because sometimes when she does play out wide, she can look a little isolated, and especially when you are playing at the Emirates as opposed to Meadow Park, if you are playing out wide, you can find yourself quite far out the outside of the box, and often we've seen her try and link others into play or put crosses in. But I think what we've seen now is, like you say, Jessy, how dangerous she can be when she does get in those areas.
Well, I think also what's kind of been interesting is when you think about Arsenal's sort of attack as a whole, that when you've got, say, Ford and Mead, given that Kelly's kind of been injured, like obviously been carrying an injury and not been able to get regular minutes throughout the season, that both Ford and Mead feel like they're players like who do like to come in. So it's kind of felt obvious that you're asking then Smith to be the one that, like, say, stretches play a little bit more, especially again if you've got Russo playing as your 9 to start games. So I think it'll be really interesting in terms of whether that's like Chloe Kelly picking up better fitness and maybe being able to be a slightly different profile that allows Smith to do that, or probably more realistically looking at who Arsenal get in the summer, given that Mead and Ford's age, that we're expecting there to be a refresh in those kind of positions. I think that will tell us a lot about how, you know, like what Smith's sort of long-term tactical profiling looks like in this team.
And yeah, on this subject, and to bring it back to the tie as well, I think it's worth mentioning Olivia Smith's yellow card in the first leg is one of the funniest things I've ever seen, because she was one booking away from a suspension, and obviously Arsenal knew they were going to go through and play Chelsea. I'm confident she's never taken a throw-in for Arsenal. All of a sudden, she started taking the throw-ins and was taking ages over them on the right-hand side. When she finally got booked, there was a throw-in on the left, and she ran over to the left wing to take the throw-in, finally got her booking, and when she got it, she didn't even end up taking the throw. It was the most obvious, but I'm here for it, personally, to get her suspended for the second leg.
I think it's very smart. We're going to talk about, just briefly, because we are obviously going to get into it closer to the quarter-final tie, but this result for Arsenal sets up what we all expected, which was a quarter-final against Chelsea. A huge game for both sides. And Tim, we were chatting before, we believe the first time they're going to be playing across 2 legs.
I think so. It's the first time I can remember, yeah, and certainly the first time in Europe as well.
Which is a completely different proposition to what we're used to. Obviously, we know that Chelsea played Manchester City at this stage of competition last season and overcame a 2-0 deficit in the first leg. But I guess, Jessy, I'll start with you. It has been a weird few weeks for Chelsea. They haven't been playing well. Results have picked up. This is very different to how they would usually, you know, approach these games against Arsenal, because so often it's these all or nothing one-off games, whether it feels like that in the league or it's these cup finals we've seen them play over and over again. 2 legs, second leg at Stamford Bridge. It's a very different proposition.
Yeah, I mean, it feels very momentous and scary. I think it's going to be really interesting because, yeah, firstly, like I always say this, like this is just the best game in English women's football, in terms of the history between the clubs, the recent, you know, whether it's managers fighting, whether it's fans fighting, there's so much like drama within it. And I think something that's also really interesting within these games is, as much as lots of people always try and put a kind of stamp on who like dominated a whole game, I feel like fairly often you see the pendulum swing a lot in smaller chunks within the game. So I think then when you're thinking about extending that over 180 minutes, it could be really fascinating. And I mean, you know, it's going to be really interesting to see. I feel like there have definitely been points where it feels like Bompastor's had Sleggers' number. I think, you know, in the league game recently, it felt like Sleggers definitely had Bompastor's number. Chelsea have been in this weird position whereby they've not looked very good as a whole, but it still feels like there's moments where they have managed to get things like spot on in individual games. There's also been moments where they've got them really wrong in individual games. And I feel like Chelsea's form in particular makes this feel even a game that's even harder to predict than normal. You know, I feel like form always goes out the window on this stuff regardless. And I feel like, though, when you add into the fact that Chelsea, you know, the pressure's like really on. Like, this is, in some ways, it's probably the worst thing that could happen to Bompastor, because of what's gone on in the league and because of the, you know, position she's ended up being in. Everything is riding on the Champions League, and everything would have been riding on the Champions League regardless of who they got in the quarterfinals. But if it does go wrong and they don't go through, then it's like the worst possible team in the world that you could have gone out to. And, you know, managers don't think about things in that way. I genuinely don't believe that she's going to be, she's not that kind of person. But it does add like this real, I think, extra element of intensity. And I don't think she'll think they're sitting like that. But I would be really surprised if the players weren't.
And before we even get to those ties, you've got a FA Cup 5th round game against Manchester United on Sunday, which has a lot of pressure on it. And then you've got a League Cup final as well against Manchester United. Again, 2 games that they will be expected to win. So we could be entering those ties with even more pressure. I mean, obviously it's all very hypothetical, but even more pressure on her shoulders, with a lot of noise around the club still, around Paul Green's departure, around potential players leaving, around Millie Bright's endless TikToks that she keeps making, which I think are, you know, someone needs to stop them, please. It's very noisy over there at the moment. And I agree with you, like, form completely goes out the window here. But there must be so much pressure sitting over that whole group because it's the Champions League. If it was any other competition, I think you could say, well, it doesn't have the same weight to it. But for them, it's so much pressure. Yeah,
and this is also a position that this group has never been in, really, like in terms of being totally out of the league by this point. And, you know, I think it's like kind of a hard thing to pass because on the one hand, the Champions League has been the only thing every season for about the past 3 or 4 seasons. And I don't think there's been any illusions, definitely under Hayes, maybe less so under Bompastor last season because it was her first season, that Chelsea would throw the league title if it meant they got a good shot at the Champions League. And at points, they kind of have done that, and it's only been through other teams' fuck-ups that they've ended up actually still winning the league anyway. So to that extent, I'm like, well, does the focus really change, like, for the group compared to, like, what it has been over the past 3 or 4 years? But I do just think, factually, you feel different if you have other stuff to play for. And that was what was so crazy in Hayes' last season, right, was that Chelsea went from being in 4 competitions to being in none in the space of 28 days. Okay, they actually turned out to still be in the league, but everyone thought they weren't. They were out of that at the time. And it's like Chelsea are sort of in a similar position in that way that you've just said, that they could go into those games, you know, being in an FA Cup quarter-final, having a trophy, and I feel like then you maybe feel like you're in a good place. If they could go into those games being like, that is literally all that there is left. And I think then maybe it takes on an even more different tone.
You said other teams' fuck-ups there. I say Stina Blackstenius, the only player who is so clutch she can win the league for clubs she doesn't even play for.
It's just a shame she can't do it for Arsenal.
I love Stina. Actually, you know what? I don't know if anyone saw, Crossways had Kelly Smith on, and there's a great clip of her talking about Stina
yeah.
and how elite she is. And I know she's become a bit of a gag, but actually, when it comes down to it, it is unbelievable how clutch she is. She's one of a kind. Tim, it could, at this point in time, Arsenal are in very good form.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what that will look like going into the quarterfinals, but they've got a slightly nicer run ahead of themselves, I guess. Yep. Definitely an easier tie in the FA Cup, that's for sure. But they'll probably be feeling, I know it's Chelsea and it's a huge rival, but they'll probably be feeling quite confident going into this because this most recent block has been a very good block for Arsenal.
Yeah, I think from Arsenal's perspective, they should try and play up the psychological side because of all the stuff Jessy said. I think there's a lot more pressure on Chelsea in this. I don't want to reduce football matches, big football matches, to like internet arguments too much, but Arsenal fans kind of already have a response if they lose this game. And also I think the fact that it's a quarter-final makes me feel, from an Arsenal perspective, slightly less pressure, just because if Arsenal go out to Chelsea, there's still a semi-final there. It's not quite the final. Like, there's still other opportunities for them not to do it. But I would certainly be playing that up. The fact that Arsenal have the Champions Cup as well, the FIFA Champions Cup, I know that's a bit of a sham tournament, but it's still kind of there, and it means that Arsenal have already won silverware this season. And I do think that gives you something. It's almost like winning the League Cup when you're going into the end of the season and you think, okay, we've got something. It's not going to be a trophyless season. And am I shameless enough to wear a specific brand of jumper for this show? Who can say, basically? But yeah, I think there's a lot more pressure on Chelsea here. Obviously, Arsenal defending champions and all of that. So you've got that kind of... If I were Renee Sleggers, I'd be saying we've done it and they haven't, and the pressure's on them. And I'd be ramping that up quite a bit. And
if I was Sonia Bonpastor, you would probably try and flip the script and say, well, there's pressure on them because they're the holders and they'll be expected to get through. But I think we've mentioned throughout this season of the Champions League that because of what Arsenal did last season and how it was so, against all odds, and no one really expected them to be in that position and beat Barcelona in the final, it feels like a different sort of pressure because you're already the unexpected champions, rather than if they were in Barcelona's shoes and they had the trophy and everyone's just expecting them to do it all over again. And that is slightly different. It does feel like you've got a bit more of a free hit.
Yeah, and I'd say also, bringing this back to a more kind of neutral lens, I think for like the WSL and for English football, this is an amazing tie. If you supported any other club and you probably don't really have a preference between Arsenal and Chelsea, you're probably just, this is popcorn on the sofa stuff. But like you said, Jessy, I mean, both teams are completely out of the title race as well. And that brings, if you'd said to someone, let's go back, 4 or 5 years ago, the fact that Arsenal and Chelsea are going to meet in the Champions League feels inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. And, in the next few years, that's going to happen. Imagine if you'd said to someone 3 or 4 years ago, and both teams are going to be entirely out of the title race when it happens. That really adds like a flavour to it as well. And I think, from a neutral point of view, I know there are probably a lot of fans who are kind of a bit bored of Arsenal and Chelsea and all of that.
Tim, I never get bored of it. Like Jessy said, I just think the Manchester derby is getting better every season. Mm-hmm. But in terms of box office rivalry, entertainment value, and the rivalry between the fans, like you say, Jessy, it always delivers. The players love it. They're so up for it. I mean, look at what the reaction was from the fans and the Arsenal players when they beat Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. It always delivers for me. It's the best game of the season. It's the one I always get most excited for. And I think the product on the pitch also, you see that, and I think it's always one of the best quality games of the season as well. You mentioned WSL in terms of kind of a big moment for them. 3 English teams through to the quarterfinals is massive. And we are an English pod, so of course we always, we show preference to English sides and we like to celebrate that.
But it's the second season in a row, and there's been a long time where I think there's been valid questions about why don't English teams do very well in the Champions League? How have a team, say like Barcelona, or in the past a team like Lyon, who do play in weaker leagues, how come they've been able to then beat the best teams in England like consistently? And I think I've always felt like there's going to be a point that, because you saw it with the Premier League in the Champions League as well, that for a long time there was sort of a similar thing where it just felt like, okay, you'd get teams who would win it, but there wouldn't be that same consistent spread. Whereas now it feels like on the men's side, across all 3 European competitions, it really doesn't matter how shit you're doing in the Premier League. You appear to be far better than almost everyone in the Champions League, Europa League or Conference League. And I think that feels like maybe we're also getting to that point with the WSL. I think the league phase really benefits the WSL teams as well. That I feel like that ability to go and play different teams and be used to playing different styles of football and be used to coming up against strong teams regularly, and the fact you also then consequently have to build a squad in your league to be able to deal with that, because otherwise you are going to struggle, I think, in the WSL too. I think all of those things have really benefited the English teams. But, you know, it does feel like, because I think also there's an extent, okay, Manchester United Bayern I think will be interesting, but if Chelsea and Arsenal weren't playing each other, I feel like they would be seen as, you know, potential favourites in both of their quarterfinals. So you wouldn't be surprised to see, you know, Chelsea and Arsenal be in opposite semi-finals as they were last year. And I felt like that was potentially true last year with Manchester City. Like, I know they obviously were going through an injury crisis and things had got quite chaotic and Taylor had been sacked. But even then, you kind of felt like this was a team who was unlucky to be drawn against Chelsea in terms of what, you know, their ability in progressing would be. And obviously that's just kind of the nature of the size of the Champions League. You know, if you've got 3 teams in a quarterfinal, there's a good chance they're going to play each other. But I think the WSL should be proud at how they've, like, turned it around. And, you know, like, I know, for example, like on the Chelsea thing, there's always so much focus that Chelsea haven't won the Champions League. And I really understand that, especially if you're a rival fan, it's like a great thing to dunk on. Like, I feel like that about Arsenal Men. Like, obviously you do. But like, I've always felt genuinely really proud at like how Chelsea have managed to go from a team that, you know, had sort of not played, you know, they don't have Arsenal's history in the Champions League. Like, they've not been doing this for years and years. They've been doing it for a decade, but they've become a team who will like consistently reach the semi-final. And I think that is something that matters, like, for all of those teams outside of just, you know, actually winning it, as important as that also is.
What's going to be really interesting as well, because we'll get on to talk about Manchester United's result, but one of these quarter-finalists will probably not be in the Champions League next season, given the race for the Champions League in the WSL, which is another very interesting battle. And it goes back to showing how strong the league is, how competitive it is, that someone's going to miss out. Who knows who that team's going to be, because it's so tight there. But Manchester United, I think, do deserve a lot of credit. And we've spoken about it a number of times when we talked about Champions League games this season on the pod. 5-0 win over Atletico Madrid on aggregate, set up a really tough, but I do think winnable quarterfinal against Bayern Munich, because Bayern Munich are a bit, you sort of don't know what you're going to get on your day. They can be really good, they can be very chaotic. I think for Manchester United, it's going to be about who can stay fit. You know, we talk about what Chelsea have to try and maintain, and they'll probably have players coming back from injury, whereas in Manchester United, they're sort of dropping like flies over these next few weeks with a lot of big games. But a massive shout out for absolute Jess Park screamer last night, and she is someone who has just completely elevated their squad, and they've brought in some more players in Lundqvist and Schuler over January, which has been very important. Vangerheim, Tim, you know, Jessy just touched on there about how Arsenal have been doing this for many years in Europe and know how to maybe navigate it more than most. But for United, this is their first ever venture into this sort of competition. We are seeing the realities of how you manage the sort of Wednesday to or Thursday to Sunday rotation and squad. But they do deserve a lot of credit for doing what they have done, getting to the quarterfinal and beating. Yes, it's not a super tough playoff game, but coming through at 5-0, it is impressive.
Yeah, hugely, particularly because they went through the qualifiers. And I'll be honest, in a WSL context, I kind of mentally wrote them off a little bit as challenging for that kind of, not challenging, but getting that top 3 just because of the size of their squad. Coming into the season, I thought they've got 15 really good players. Like, I don't look at their squad and see bad players. I just don't see enough of them. So for me, the credit for them is what they did in the first half of the season, negotiating all those qualifiers, staying competitive in the league, and negotiating the league phase with quite a skeleton squad, which they've now beefed up. I mean, again, to your point, Jessy, I feel exactly the same about it. Feels like it's been inevitable that the WSL will really start to, I won't say dominate this competition, they won't, because only one team can win it, and Barca and Lyon are still incredibly strong. But the fact that this is, you know, United, they finished 5th in the WSL 2 seasons ago against the obviously third place team in Spain, and they've absolutely swept them aside. I mean, you said it's not the hardest kind of playoff tie, it's not, but at the same time, looking at it on paper, it's a lot tougher than Leuven, and obviously that's how seeding works. But I wasn't expecting United to win this 5-0. I think after the fact, you watch the ties, and they were well worthy of that. I do think it says a lot that the team who are somewhere between 2nd and 4th in the WSL have just completely, like, at half tilt, really. And, United did a lot of similar things in this second leg to what Arsenal did, which is they've got a couple of players who are maybe not quite fit, and they've had the luxury of just saying, do you know what, don't worry about it, we'll go with 4 outfield players on the bench. Arsenal accidentally got a player suspended for their second leg, and United didn't quite do that, but they've got a lot of players who are on the edge fitness wise, and they've just gone, we got this tie won, don't worry about risking some of those players. And I think, to your point as well, the fact this is the first time they're doing this, I think it's hugely to their credit.
Yeah, well, look at just quickly the whole quarter-final lineup. So obviously we've got Arsenal, Chelsea, Wolfsburg, Lyon, Manchester United, Bayern Munich, and Real Madrid, Barcelona. So the quarter-final is when you really see much more competitive, and I think less lopsided matches. The Real Madrid-Barcelona one, Real Madrid are a really frustrating team to watch. Obviously, it's a El Clasico. We've seen Real Madrid be better in those domestic clashes against Barcelona, but you'd expect Barcelona to come out on top in that, and the same, I think, in that Lyon-Wolfsburg game. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in Bayern Manchester United. Let's quickly touch on what was the most interesting tie, really, that was left to work with, which was Juve-Wolfsburg. It was 2-2 going into the second leg. Juve had been 2-0 up and let that lead slip, which is kind of textbook Juve in the Champions League this season, and they end up going out to Wolfsburg, who end up winning 2-0 on the night. They were 1-0 up for the majority of the game. Juve were pushing and pushing and pushing to find an equaliser, and they didn't get it. And then Wolfsburg score a very late second winner. Jessy, it's really big for Wolfsburg because they are former giants of Europe, and we've seen them really slide over the last couple of seasons. And I didn't think they looked great for large portions of the league phase this season. But to pull off this result, having been at one point looking like they were going out the tie in the first leg, to now pulling off this result in the second leg, they did have to ride it out a little bit, especially last night when Juve made those the triple sub to try and spin the game, and Girelli came off and they were really pushing, and the goalie was making tons of saves. But this is big for them to feel like they're back in amongst it, I think, with Europe's best.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about institutional knowledge and the advantages that can give you in the Champions League, I kind of feel like Wolfsburg are a good example of that in terms of looking at these 2 legs, and in terms of sort of a belief that you're going to get back into, you see it all the time with teams who go sort of 2-0 down, and it's like they've all just decided that that's it and ties are kind of over. And I think obviously if you've been in positions before, maybe where you've bottled a 2-0 lead in the Champions League final in fairly recent memory, that you feel that teams that can get back into it. And yeah, I mean, I think obviously Juve were quite frustrating to watch in this game, because the second half they were just camped in Wolfsburg half. But I mean, Steve Johannes had a great game, but I still it didn't feel like, for all of Juve's pressure, it wasn't really like they were able to generate really clear-cut opportunities. Maybe the one that really stands out is when Johannes sort of palmed it out into Krumbeagle's path, and she just smashed it over the bar. So yeah, I think a frustrating one for Juventus, because it felt like with the amount of pressure they had in that second half, you really would have thought they'd fashion something a bit more. Obviously, the scoreline, it kind of ends up looking more lopsided than the game felt because of the late Zikai goal, which was a fantastic finish. But yeah, Wolfsburg, they've always had that kind of strange sheen of inevitability. And Wolfsburg-Lyon is, that is a classic Women's Champions League matchup.
Yeah, often the quarterfinals do just serve us some of the classics, so that's exciting.
But I think also, I will say again, that's testament to how much the women's game across Europe has grown. And I know, like lots of these ties either are familiar, Real Madrid, Barcelona, we've seen that quite a lot in Champions League in recent years. So, or they're familiar to us because their league ties. It still is absolutely astounding to me that this is the first time Chelsea and Arsenal will play each other in the Women's Champions League. But it feels like a tie you're very familiar with, obviously. But, I do increasingly feel like all of these games feel interesting, even if, you know, like Lyon and Barcelona, I feel confident that both of those teams will go through. But I would hope, and maybe I'm being a little bit optimistic, but I don't think excessively optimistic, that we might still have stuff to play for in all of the second legs, which hasn't always been true in Women's Champions League quarterfinals. And, you know, there is definitely still the potential that Lyon and Barcelona maybe just or you know, any of those teams sort of destroy the other in the first leg of these games. It's obviously not like a guarantee, but it does just feel, I think, meaningful that all 4 of these ties feel exciting.
We're going to do a bit of an Arsenal mailbag in this last section as we've got Tim on the show. Be rude not to. So that's going to be coming up after this. So, Tim, we've got a lot of questions. Last time you were on the show, we had a lot of questions and we talked so much about Renee's new contract. I think she'd just been given it, or maybe she hadn't.
Before.
It was just before.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about the squad and who's maybe going to be moved on and needing to update, and the future under Renee Sleggers. And it feels like when we had you on then, the team was in a very different position to what it is in now.
It's so Arsenal.
It's just, I think it's just so...
It was that Chelsea game.
But I also
that
just think
that's what these games do. They just like change seasons.
I don't think it's just so Arsenal, but it's just so football. Like, you know, the narrative completely shifts overnight sometimes of we're in a crisis to things have never been better. But again, we've had lots of questions about squad. So Hellend has asked, how many players does Tim think Arsenal need in the summer, and what positions with players out of contract in summer too?
Yeah, that all depends on who stays and who goes. I think there are still some decisions to be made there that will be informed by availability. So clearly Arsenal need wide forwards. That's a definite, I think, because Beth Mead and Caitlin Ford are both out of contract. It feels unlikely to me that both of those players will stay. And Beth nearly left last summer anyway. So there's probably a world where they both go. Again, I think that's to be decided. But in that case, Arsenal would need 2 wide forwards. Same with Stina. What's the future for her? Michelle Agimang's there, getting back to fitness at the moment. Does Olivia Smith being able to play up front change things for Stina as well? There's so much that's up in the air.
Is Stina out of contract as well?
I think she is, but I'm always so wary about being certain about that because there's so many plus ones.
The contracts are very mysterious, especially at Arsenal.
Beth and Caitlin I know for certain are, as is Katie McCabe, and I think a decision's been made there, as is Steph Catley as well. But definitely the forward line. And definitely the midfield, because at the moment Arsenal's preferred midfield double pivot is Mariona and Kim Little, who are 30 and 35. So clearly there has to be some kind of refresh there, which we actually tried a couple of years ago with Palova, Cooney Cross and Catherine Cool, who came on last night as well for Atleti, all being signed around the same time. But Kim Little kind of just won't fade into the background. So one by one, they've all kind of not really established themselves yet. But definitely midfield, forward line, and there needs to be a contingency at left centre-back as well, because Steph Catley, I hope she stays. I hope they give her a new contract. I think she's been one of our best performers over the last 18 months, but she's 32. So some kind of contingency in that position needs to be made.
Crazy how old that team, like when you reel it off, it is mental.
Great segue, because you mentioned a lot of Australian players there, and HRB has said, how do you feel about the Aussies going to the Asian Cup? Because we haven't actually mentioned that in the conversation about Arsenal's squad over these next few weeks. Are you concerned about that? Do you think they're going to be able to manage it with those absentees?
So first and foremost, what I'd say, because I think sometimes, particularly like in your club, you get very focused on the club. What does it mean for the club? And I think sometimes we run the risk of disrespecting these competitions. And I know it really means a lot to those players. It's on home soil in Australia. The Matildas really underperformed in the last Asian Cup, so I think those players are all really, really determined, particularly Caitlin and Steph are both in their 30s now, so the Matildas, I think, is starting to come to the end of that generation of players, so I think they'll be really keen, and I wish them all really good luck, first and foremost. I'm not too concerned about it at the moment, because it only looks like it's going to be 2 or 3 games against West Ham, LCL, and so I think they should be able to handle that. We might be vulnerable if another couple of injuries come up in that time, and the bench has looked a bit thin without Stina and Beth Mead recently, so I'm not hugely concerned at the moment, and I don't think you can really make transfer plans or anything like that on the basis of 2 or 3 games. That's a hamstring injury, and I do think you've just got to be able to deal with that, so I'm not massively concerned.
Kate has asked, and we sort of talked about it earlier, but how are you feeling about Renee since the last time you were on Counter Press? Because it does feel very different, and also first time you've been on since she got her new contract.
Yeah.
And people must be feeling quite excited about the future based on the last period of games, but that doesn't delete what happened at the start of the season and obviously the amazing journey she took them on at the end of last season. But she's still a very young coach, and there's still a lot of work to be done to feel like this team can challenge for the UWCL title and in lots of competitions year upon year.
Yeah, so last time I was on the show, I said that if they're going to give Renee a new contract, they have to commit to her and that they have to appoint a technical director. Sometimes you know stuff and you can't say it. So I might have had a bit of a sense of the way the wind was blowing last time I was on. So they've appointed Jodie Taylor as technical director. That all remains to be seen whether that's a good appointment or anything like that, but I kind of like the logic of it. They've had her in a different position. She's got huge experience from all over the world as a player, and I think they've been impressed with her behind the scenes. So I like the theory of it, that they've got quite young technical director in, Jodie Taylor and Renee, similar age, and they've really made a commitment, particularly with the length of the deal. We know this squad is going to turn over, and that is firmly in the hands of, the structure as it is now. So, yeah, I think I said last time I was on, there can't be any half measures. You're either giving this rebuild to Renee and putting the structure around her, or you don't. And they've done that, and they've made that commitment. Whether that proves to be the right thing, time will tell. But I'm okay with it, and I think one of the things Renee has shown a real aptitude for is problem solving. So we talk about these problems with Arsenal sometimes that kind of just end up going away, and I don't really reflect as enough on, we were talking a lot about ball progression without Leah Williamson being a real problem, and then it just stopped being a problem. And but I think the next stage is, can you anticipate those problems before you lose a load of points? And that's probably the next part of, quote unquote, her journey. But I like it. I like the direction of travel. But I reserve the right in a year's time to say it was all the wrong decision and we shouldn't have done it.
Don't worry, we'll keep the receipt. I wanted to follow up on that though, because I think what felt very interesting about the Jodie Taylor appointment is it is an internal move from someone that was already working at the club, who has a lot of history at the club. I do wonder if it would have been more beneficial to bring in someone with completely neutral experience who can come in and be a bit of more of a bad guy. And I mean that in the sense of there are some big decisions on the horizon. And when you've got no skin in the game, it is often easier to make those big strategic decisions and navigate big squad changes. You've got to do it carefully, because if you're the new kid on the block and you start saying goodbye to everyone, you're not going to probably lend yourself well to the existing team. But I do think it comes with a fresh approach and with an outsider approach that maybe Arsenal often do need, because with their amazing historic success also comes a lot of baggage and a sort of, we've been doing it this way for so long. And when someone is Jodie Taylor, who's got great history at the club as a player and now as a staff member, that culture is quite entrenched. Do you think there still needs to be maybe someone externally to come in at some point?
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly valid question. I think the thing is with Jodie, I think they've had this in mind for a while, and they kind of wanted to see how she got on in a slightly less public role, in a very similar role. But at the same time, I think it's a perfectly valid question to ask, that if you're effectively auditioning for a job behind the scenes, do you rock the boat that much? I don't know the answer to that. And in terms of Jodie's actual experience, I mean, Arsenal was the last club she played for, but on like a 6 to 8 week loan. And, her kind of knowledge behind the scenes, her knowledge, like she played in Sweden, she played in France, Australia, America. I think she played somewhere. I think she played in 6 countries. So like, she's obviously got a really rounded kind of experience. I think what they really wanted is a bit of a buffer between kind of Claire Wheatley and Renee, and because Claire Wheatley, her job is increasingly, I think, boardroom, should we say, whereas Renee is very like hands-on with the players. She's a similar age, and I think they wanted someone of a quite similar kind of profile to really relate to Renee and be Renee's kind of route in. So I definitely understand the logic of it. I think it's a perfectly fair question to ask, though, whether it's, you know, there's some internal politics there. I think that'll all come out in the wash.
Question from Sophia, which I think is a really good question, and it's not just an Arsenal-related question, really. Can we help young players get better loans? Lots of recalls this season. I think this is what a lot of the top WSL clubs struggle with, is finding experience for players that prepares them to potentially break through and showcases their ability enough and also gets them game time. And I think Arsenal aren't the exception there. I think a lot of teams are struggling. But what do you think is, from an Arsenal perspective, is kind of the answer there?
Yeah, there's a clear change in direction there because, as you say, we've recalled a lot of players from WSL2 and we sent a young centre-half on loan to Leicester. I question the wisdom of that decision anyway. Is a team who realistically is going to be fighting relegation going to play an 18-year-old centre-back? Probably not. What's really interesting is they've redirected a lot of them to Scandinavia. And I think this is almost like in the men's game, maybe 10 years ago, we started to see a lot of young players go to Germany. And so I think what we're finding is WSL2 is perhaps not the best league to loan players to, but they've started to go to Sweden a little bit more. Also, the kind of, I've forgotten the official job title, head of player pathways, James Honeyman, he left recently and they're appointing for that role now. So I think we'll continue to see change in direction there.
Jessy, just from a Chelsea perspective, I guess, on that as well, is that's an issue that they've sort of, I mean, we've seen Sonia actually play some of the young players this season, Lexi Potter, Chloe Sowie, but it's a challenge they've had as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think loans, there are always so many different factors that go into it, and stuff that can seem like a good decision, you know, at the start of the season can change very quickly. You know, a club sacks their manager, for example, and, you know, the previous manager liked your loan player and they don't. So I think there's never going to be like a perfect art to it. I think with Arsenal, at least, it's felt good to see them being proactive with players who weren't necessarily getting minutes. And I think, you know, the challenge that I wonder how much maybe this is in particular a this season challenge because of the format we've got with the WSL2 this year. I think, you know, we've already seen that WSL loans, and WSL clubs have talked about this, top WSL clubs have talked about this, lots of WSL clubs aren't interested anymore in basically moulding a player that's just going to be taken away from them. You know, we saw it with Clinton at Tottenham. You have this player who's really good for you for a year. You've put all this work and effort into them, and then they go back to their parent club. I mean, obviously, like, annoyingly, probably for Clinton and Spurs, it then didn't even work out there. So that's obviously why also then with the level of the WSL2 being raised, the facilities of those clubs getting better, clubs have then started to look down there. But I think because of how many WSL2 clubs are really gunning for those promotion spots and the opportunity that feels like is there this season, you've really seen lots of those clubs invest. And I wonder if that level of investment and focus on their own players won't necessarily carry on, and that maybe that will become a more viable place for loan players again. And, you know, there are loan players who've had success. I mean, even like, so for example, Jessy Gales ended up at Bristol City and she's had a great start there. Chelsea have had Vera Jones at Bristol City and she's looked good. And, you know, interestingly, Bristol City are managed by Charlotte Healy, who's obviously someone who I think has a lot of experience with sort of working with younger players from her time at Manchester United. So I think sometimes it's not necessarily about taking that macro view of the league, that there can be opportunities that work out for players. But yeah, you know, Arsenal looking to Sweden, obviously Layla Harbert was at Portland Thorns as well, which is really interesting and not something we've really seen at all. You know, clubs are going to continue to look for those markets, but I think the stuff with abroad is you really need a specific type of player who's going to be able to suit that environment. I mean, Chelsea have used loans abroad for when they've brought players in who maybe don't have the requisite visa thing. So, for example, that's why Micah Hamano went to Hammarby before she came to Chelsea, so she could get the points to come here. But if you're moving a player from abroad already and then kind of keeping them abroad, as it were, I think that's something that maybe fits. Whereas sometimes with English players, you know, it's a lot to take an 18-year-old who's like only ever lived at home and maybe put them there. I think that's also something where that's why you want your player pathway manager to really like have a good understanding of what those personalities of players are, because for some players it won't faze them at all and for others it will.
Yeah. Very interesting. Tim, thanks so much for coming back on.
My pleasure as always. Thanks for having me.
We may get you on probably after those quarterfinal games, so we'll have to separate Jessy and Tim on that occasion. Enjoy. You won't be watching Winter Olympics this weekend, but you will be at Arsenal.
I mean, I'll be
City.
at Meadow Park, so it'll probably be close to it, to be honest.
We'll be close to an ice rink anyway, so enjoy. JPH, you're going to be at Chelsea Manchester United?
Yes.
So we'll see on Monday how that goes. But it's never a dull moment over at Kings Meadow at the moment. We'll be, of course, back on Monday talking about the 5th round of the Women's FA Cup. We'll see you then.